Guys, I am going to show you today how to put together an offer if you are working with a buyer, how to draft up an actual contract. We're going to use this listing here at 6949 Bend Brook as an example of the property that your clients would want to be going after. So I like to use Zip Forms, zipformplus.com. That's a free service that's provided through our real estate associations. I know some folks like to use .loop and some other ways of drafting up contracts, but I personally like to use Zipform myself. So I would come over here to new, again, if this is the first time I put these folks into the system, a new purchaser offer. These are templates that I've created in Zipform so that I can be ready and prepared to put together an offer. So new purchase offer, I would put the person's name. We'll just use John and Sarah Smith as an example. It's a residential property. The template that I'm going to be using is the buyer contract template, like I said, that I put together. This MLS Connect is very nice. It does allow you to put in some information into the system by putting in the MLS address for the property. So I just came and copied that, and I'm going to bring it over here, put it in here. I'm going to click this for include the photo. I like to do that. You don't have to. And click find. And by the way, this information up here is auto-populated from the system when I first connected it with my information, my login information for my MLS. So there's the property, and I'm going to say use listing. And then I will click save. And it will pop up here with some of the information filled in. I'm going to come over here to documents. And again, these are all the forms that were put in the template by myself that I use every time. You can create your own templates yourself. Up here, you would do that earlier before you'd start this process. But these are the forms that I use on a consistent basis, so I threw them in the template so that I didn't have to go look for them every time. So the 1 to 4 residential contract is the main chunk of the contract. And as you'll see, here are the auto-populated information about the property that came through because I used that MLS Connect. There are some things that I have check marked myself. I'm just going to scroll real quick and show you some things that I use on a consistent basis that I check marked in the template so that it's already checked, because 99% of the time that's the way it works for the contract. So you don't have to do that. Of course, you can leave it blank, but that is the way that I like to do it. All right, so the parties to the contract are the seller, and the information here, these 2 lines for possibly a husband and wife would go here. Where do I get that information? You come back here to the listing and click on this button right here, which is the TX, which pulls up the realist tax. Click on that, and that will take you to the owner's name. I copy, and then I will paste that into the MLS listing here, or the contract here. Just a word as an example. Generally, it is last name, first name. So I know sometimes certain nationalities, it can be difficult to know what is the first or last name, but it is generally first name, last name. So I'm going to switch that. Sorry, it's generally last name, first name in the system. So when you put it into the contract, I do put it as first name, last name. And we'll do that as an example. Again, this is John Smith and Sarah Smith. At times, you possibly may need to put their middle initial. Let's say it's John A. Smith and Sarah S. Smith for their middle initial Some contracts possibly need that. Some pre-approvals have that information. It's really up to you on how you want to put that in there. Um, I'm just going to use John Smith and Sarah Smith. Again, this has all been filled out. If you aren't able to put this information in here, you can come back to the MLS listing and find it here. Lot, block, legal description. You also can find it on the realist tax information, legal description, Hunters Creek Phase 8, Block E, Lot 30. And you will see the information that was already auto-populated there. Exclusions, the way you will find out if there are exclusions or not, you will come over here and come down to the sections here. Usually under property description, it will have a block here that says exclusions. If there is an exclusion, that is what you would put here. That may be something like curtains and rods, TVs and TV mounts, just as an example of what something may be. They may be more descriptive and put something there. If it's listed in the listing, you put it here. And again, you would generally find that in somewhere in this vicinity. It would say exclusions and then listed there. I'm going to delete that since it wasn't there. A lot of times if there's a section and nothing's put there, I like to put NA for not applicable to fill in that section. Sales price. Let's say that we are going to be putting down, let's say that we're going to be offering $475 on this property and putting down 20%. I need to do the math real quick. So 475 times 0.2 is $95,000. So I would put $95,000 there, subtract that from the 475. It would be financing $380,000 for a total of 475. So again, make sure this all matches up. Make sure that this is the appropriate amount down. If they're putting 5% down, this is where that would go, 10%, whatever. Really, at the end of the day, it's whatever the pre-approval says. You need to make sure those match, but most of the time you're going to be on the same page and understand what they're putting down on the contract. You would check mark this box right here, third-party financing addendum. Make sure that you check that. There'll be a third-party financing addendum that we'll do in a different video that will explain what goes on that. 99.9% of the time you're going to click the third-party financing addendum. You won't do the loan assumption or the seller financing addendum. License holder disclosure. In this section right here, for example, if the seller of this property was an agent, you would put something of that nature here. Seller is licensed real estate agent. You generally would find that information out in the listing. Somewhere in this listing under private remarks, you would usually find that out. Let's say the agent is related. It's the agent is selling the house for his sister. You would say in here, agent is related to seller. Something like that. And basically whatever the information that they have listed on the contract here, like I said, usually under private remarks, that's where that information would go, or you'd find it to put it in there. If you don't see anything like that, you don't need to fill this out. Earnest money. Earnest money is typically 1% of your offer price. So in this situation, 4750 in earnest money. And I'm just going to use the title company that I use all the time, which is Republic Title. I like to use Marilyn Hoagland at Republic Title, and that's the information that would go there. If you don't have or know the escrow officer's name, that's okay. You don't have to put that up there. Um, Again, 99% of the time, the buyer, this additional earnest money never comes into play. So you're never really going to fill out these two blanks here. Title policy. Most markets, the seller is paying for title. If you're trying to make your offer more attractive and you're in competition with a lot of people, then sometimes the buyer will offer to pay for that. You, of course, want to make sure that buyers are aware of the cost for title. And this would be the same title company that you put up here would go here. All right, now we're into the boundaries and the shortages. This is the extra protection that you can get on title. It would be will not be amended or deleted from the title policy, or will be amended to read shortages in the area, and somebody's got to pay for it. So however you choose to write up the offer, I've done both before. If you want to add in the extra protection, generally I would, if you're working with the buyer, ask the seller to pay for that difference. Or you can check this box here, and you won't be adding in the extra protection. I'm going to leave it right there for now. Survey. You have three options for in dealing with a survey. Most of the time, the first box is going to be checked with a certain amount of days, giving the seller a certain amount of days to give the survey, the current survey, to you. And if they do, they have to fill out what's called a T-47 affidavit. You'll be used to seeing that. And if it's allowable, the title company will choose that. If it's not allowable and they don't allow that survey, they're asking for a buyer to pick up the cost. Or excuse me, that's the way this contract would be written. Usually buyers are the ones that are paying for surveys. So that can be checked as a buyer. If you want ask the seller to pay for it, you of course would just check that box. Basically, it goes like this. Title's usually a seller fee. Surveys are typically a buyer fee. But you can save everybody money by trying to use the old survey, and that's what this first section is for. If neither of those come into play and you want the buyer to pick up a brand new one, or that's the way that the seller's asking, you would get rid of all of this part in section 1, and you would say something like, in 15 days after the date of execution, the buyer will pay for a new one. Or in this one down here, within 15 days, the seller will pay for a new survey. So there's three different choices. Most of the time, you're going to be dealing with number 1. The difference between 2 and 3 would be the time allotted. You don't need, if you're going to buy a new survey, you don't want to do that right away because you have the option period and the whether it's HOA or financing that you're dealing with. You want to make sure that your clients want to purchase the property, so don't do that. Don't put a short window there on either of these. The reason we do put a short window there on this one is that we want the survey to be given so that we can find out, want it to be given to the title company as soon as possible so that we can find out if the buyer or seller will need to be purchasing a new one. This would be objections. Very rarely do you ever have anything written here outside of residential use. Really doesn't really come to play most of the time here where we operate and do business, but basically this is saying that you want to make that you're protecting your buyer, that if for some reason the house was not able to be used as a house, then they could get out of the contract. 3 days is a time frame to deal with that issue. Again, usually not, we don't deal with these objections very much at all, if ever. Title policy, if the property is in an HOA, and I'll show you where you would find that. HOA mandatory and the HOA dues right here. So yes, it is in an HOA. So this property is in an HOA. And that just means that you'll have to go do the homeowners association addendum as well. This is where you'll check if the buyer has seen the seller's disclosure or not. And where to find that would be in this section right here. You come back to the MLS listing, and you come over here to documents to see if they've listed any of their documents or uploaded any of the seller's disclosure or survey or T47 documents. I don't think they have. Sorry about that. If there were documents uploaded, there would be a different little emblem here. It would be a little paper look. I'm going to see if we can show you another one. Here we go. This is what you would see right here if there were documents that had been uploaded. And that's usually where the seller's disclosure would be. So in this instance, because we do not have anything uploaded here, we would come back to the contract here, and the buyer has not received it, and we want to see that within 2 days after the effective date, executed date of this contract. You can also email the agent to ask for the seller's disclosure, which I do a lot prior to even putting in the offer. So if you did receive it from them, even if it was through email, you would click it there, and that would be it. Okay. I want to see this as soon as possible, so you don't want to do more than probably 2 to 3 days on that. At times, the seller is not required to furnish a seller's disclosure, something like if there was a death in the family and the property went into probate, and the sellers were family that were selling the property, never lived in the property, they would not be required to turn in a seller's disclosure. Or if it was a bank-owned property, they wouldn't have to do that either. Right here, this is a common question we get all the time. When a buyer sees this, buyer accepts the property as is, they're wondering, does that mean that I don't get to do an inspection? No, that is not what this means if you check that. What it means is that you don't see anything glaring at the property at the moment that you definitely want the seller to take care of. For instance, let's say there was a broken window in a bedroom. Then this is where you would put that. 9 times out of 10, everybody accepts the property as is. Of course, and later in the contract, you'll see that there's a stipulation to put together to do an option period and do an inspection, and you're protected under that time frame to ask for something like a broken window or anything else you may see that comes up. But if there were something, this is where you would put that. All right, the residential service contract, this is the home warranty section. If you're asking for a home warranty, this is where you would put it. I see a range of usually $500 to $550 in here. We're asking for the seller to pay for a 1 year of a home warranty. If there's a pool, generally $650 to $700 is usually what I see. There's also a pool at the house, since you want that to be covered as well. Okay, I'm gonna use 500 here. Closing, this is the closing date. You definitely want to make sure that you're working with the lender and that you know when they can close. That's usually within 30 days or possibly 35 or so, give or take, depending on weekends and things of that nature. So for instance, on something like this, we would go out to, so May 4th right now, we don't want May. Why is that? Oh, here we go. So we would want June 4th. We would just use as an example, since we're sitting here on May 4th. I'm just using 30 days as an example. You want to make sure that we close on a date that is within Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. That you don't put a weekend day on there, since title companies are not open on weekends. Like I said, 30 days is a normal time frame. Possession, this depends on the situation. Upon closing or funding is usually what happens. At times there are leasebacks and things of that nature that may cause this one to be checked according to a temporary residential lease. Okay, so you just need to know which one goes with which, and I will explain what this looks like in another video. I'm going to use upon closing and funding. Special provisions. If there was something that didn't go into the contract or have an addendum for the contract, this is where you would use this. You always, if there is an addendum, use the addendum, don't use special provisions. But this is where you would put some sort of information you're trying to convey to them. Maybe for something like this where buyer asks for seller to respond by 12 noon May 5th, or offer can be removed. Something like that possibly would go here in special provisions. Okay, normally it is left blank. Settlement and other expenses. This is where you would put if you are asking the the seller to pay for some form of closing cost. So this is where you would put that. If you're asking them to pay for your buyer $3,500 of the closing cost, this is where that would go. In this market, that's usually blank. All right, on this section right here, you really never fill this out. This is for if there were any, oh, I'm sorry, that's the next section. On this section right here, this is where you would put your buyer's information. So you would put John Smith and his email address and phone number. If you don't know the seller's information, so you don't need to worry about that. This is where you would check the boxes for the addendum that are a part of the contract. So we are using a third-party financing addendum. We're also using a addendum for property subject to mandatory membership in a property owners association, which is long for HOA. We're clicking both of those. If we were doing a seller leaseback, letting the sellers live in the home after they sold it to us, we would check that box as well. If you were adding something like a fridge, a non-realty item to the contract, you would put that here and write it in. Those are just some examples of things that you may use. If there ever was a home that you're selling that was built prior to 1976, you would click the seller's disclosure of informational lead-based paint as well. And again, I will do separate videos on all of those. Okay, so in this contract that we're sending through, and this is usually probably what most are, you are doing a financing addendum as well as an HOA. All right, this is the option period, also called the termination option. This is where you would be offering some version of cash to the seller for the option period. This ranges in most markets anywhere from 5 to 7 days. This could also range $100 to $250 or so. It could get more if you're working with a multiple offer situation, but I would say in most markets 7 to 10 days currently for $100 if you're not competing is what most would be expecting. This box will always be checked. Option fee will be credited to the sales price at closing, meaning it will go back to your that'll go back to your buyers at closing. They will not lose this $100. The only way they lose it, of course, is if they walk during the option period and terminate the contract. This is the part that I was talking about earlier that you don't need to ever fill out. This is usually for attorneys, and nobody typically ever uses attorneys for these, so this is usually always left blank. This box here will be eventually have a date in it, but when you're sending an offer, it won't have a date yet. Broker information, again, I put all this information in the system for myself. in the template so that it's there every time I put something in. And make sure that you fill this out for the seller side, and the location that you will find that in is here, right down here. This is where you would find that, okay? Most of the time when using zip forms, they also, through the pull down, will have the information already there. So you can see EA Star Realtors, which is what that says right there. So I know that's correct. License number, the brokerage license number. Let's see if that's the right one. No, it's not. So here's the broker license number. Put that there. Listing associate's name, Tom Tang, is there. His license is not in that, so I gotta come get it. Here's his license number. His email address should come up. His phone number should come up. Double check that. 448251. Yep. The supervisor to the to the agent, office supervisor John Zhang. And sometimes I don't have their license info. That's fine. Here is their address, phone number. Most of this stuff can always be filled in through the drop down. And seller only as seller's agent is what you check here. And that is it. 3%, you want to make sure that that is correct for you and your commission. If that, you also want to check here. This is where you'd see how much they're offering. Buyer agent commission, BAC is what that is here. If that says 2%, you're not going to get 3%. So just be aware of that. What that says here, 99.9% of the time it is 3%, but occasionally some offer 2, 2.5, and that is what you would put here. This information for our contracts will be the real estate project. This is our license number. This is the information for where you would put your information as an assistant, excuse me, as the associate here. This is our address on all that there, okay? This is the receipt page. This is where you will receipt the contract, the earnest money, the option money after, again, everything has been taken care of. But that is it. If you're sending in a contract for the 1 to 4 residential contract, that is how you would fill one out. And again, remember, you'll need to do the addendum and add those to the contract. But for this video, that is it.